ranking the scene.
What the fuck is up, YouTube? Marcos here with Sam.
Yo.
Welcome to the premiere of Ranking the Scene, which is something new we're trying, where each and every week we're going to throw 2, 3, 4 albums at the board and rank where they ultimately land in the scene. It's all in the name, right? So this week we're actually going to start out with 8 albums that have been suggested to us by our viewers. These are considered quote-unquote favorites of theirs. So we figured it was a good starting off point, and we wanted to start with 8 because it kind of lets us flesh out what this will ultimately look out a little better than if we just started with like 3 at the onset. Did I miss anything there? I mean, there's not really a whole lot to this. We're going to try to do this on like a weekly basis.
I mean, the only thing that you missed is level setting how important this is. So we're ranking every album in the scene from best to worst, and this will be definitive. Where you land on this list is where you'll stay. And ultimately, our goal is to each Marcos and I bring a new album every week, as well as take suggestions from our patrons. So if you want to suggest an album for ranking the scene, go to patreon.com/SOTS podcast.
And if you look at those tiers, we start all the way at the top with GOAT, greatest of all time, or maybe there's an album thrown at us that we both consider a crime to humanity. Maybe we bring that crime to humanity to the show ourselves just to see where it ranks. Is it truly that? Is it better? Is it worse? That's really it. But you touched on it, right, Sam? This is definitive. This is as definitive a list as they will come.
In a perfect world, years from now, you could show this to somebody and they would inherently understand what the best and worst albums of the scene were and everything in between. Down to their placement. There is not just albums that are the greatest of all time. There is the greatest of all time. And then there is the subsequent greatest of all time. But there is a number 1. And there also is a fucking number last, which is whatever album will end at the bottom of Crime to Humanity after every other album that comes before it.
So painstakingly, we settled on 8 separate tiers that each and every one of these albums could potentially fall into. I'm just going to list them off just before we get into things. So I'm going to start from the bottom. This time. Crime to Humanity. Fucking awful. Pretty mid. And here's where it kind of swings a little bit. Just okay. Or you could be that bitch. Or potentially a certified hood classic. And then, the upper ranks here, masterpiece and GOAT.
As always, expect most albums to fall somewhere in the middle, with extremely few up at that GOAT masterpiece level, and ideally very few in the crime against humanity.
Yeah, we're going to try to refresh ourselves on these albums every week too. So leading up to this episode, you and I both spent a lot of time with the 8 albums listed below. Sam, do you want to list those off?
8 albums, Marcos, starting with, in alphabetical order, I believe, At the Skylines, The Secrets to Life, Billy Talent's Billy Talent 2, Bullet for My Valentine's The Poison, Casey's Where I Go When I Am Sleeping, Emarosa's Self-Titled, Enter Shikari's The Spark, I Set My Friends on Fire's You Can't Spell Slaughter Without Laughter, and finally, Paramore's After Laughter.
Excellent save there, Sam. Are you ready to jump into this? I think I am. I feel like we've covered all our bases. People understand how important this list will ultimately be, how important it is right now. And these are our honorary 8 inductees, I guess, here. And like you said, we'll do it alphabetically. So the first album that's going to officially be nominated into or make it onto Ranking the Scene is The Secrets to Life by At the Skyline.
Correct me if I'm wrong. Was this their only album?
It was.
Their debut and final release.
We had an EP and then the album. and that this band was no more.
Which is a shame because they were quite good. It's worth noting. And they were quite good off the strength of a singular album and an EP that preceded it. Marcus, so for those who are unfamiliar with that Skylines, they were a California metalcore band?
They were. You and I had the opportunity to see them open for another band on this list, Enter Shikari.
Yeah, that's right.
On a bill like a decade ago, which is how long it's been since we've heard from this act. And honestly, dude, nail on the head, right? Metalcore with a Cali twist.
You know what was great about it though? And I realized that I did go back and listen to all these albums, which I intend to do every time we do this exercise, just to refresh my memory. It's wild how much this singular album was able to capture like 3 years of metalcore.
It's a beautiful little time capsule.
Yeah. It's very much influenced by all of the albums that they listened to while or directly before making this.
Yes. And, tip of the hat to the band too, because for being a debut album, it's pretty good. It's pretty consistent.
Right. I think that it's not really exemplary in like any individual facet, but what I like about it is just how like creative it is in the way that only like a band with nothing to lose and just looking to have fun and get a bunch of ideas like out into the open can do, right? Like, don't kid yourself. 4 albums down the road, At the Skylines would have sounded blander.
Yes.
But because there was no stakes in releasing this album, like this is why people celebrate so many bands' first debut album, because they so clearly are not like generally commercially influenced. They're just like personal in a way, right? They're just like the personal taste of these individuals who all came together and like threw all of their influences at the wall and then saw what stuck. And like, what's crazy about this is how many of those influences they managed to like shove in here. Like there are moments where this sounds like Asking Alexandria, Pierce the Veil, A Skylit Drive, something like Dance Gavin Dance. Like it really was like a singular Warped Tour lineup all smashed into one record.
You're not wrong. They also brought in the big guns on this one. They had Kellen Quinn with a feature.
You know what's crazy is that Kellen Quinn, this is going to sound weird. Kellen Quinn doesn't sound like that anymore in a way that like it kind of caught me off guard. Maybe it's also a little bit of like putting him in a template that like doesn't fit modern day Sleeping with Sirens. So like just by virtue of the style of music, it makes Kellen sound very different, but it's like he comes in and he sounded more to me like the vocalist from A Skylit Drive. Jagman, yes. Than he did Kellen. Though I feel like at a time they were kind of the same guy.
Could have also been period. How they were like produced or mixed or something.
Fair.
You can cut that. So obviously re-listened to this one as well. I don't know. This one's a challenging first one because I actually don't know where I would place it. Because I could argue for 3 separate tiers.
All right, hit me with all 3 of them, and I'll tell you where it's supposed to go.
Certified Hood Classic, That Bitch, or Just Okay.
There it is.
And I think it's probably Just Okay. This song's got 4.
This album.
Yeah, this album's got like 4 incredibly strong tracks.
Right. And it has one extremely incredible moment where they go, let's get sexy for a minute.
Woo!
For no reason.
Right.
But that's what was good about albums like this, is that this was a period of metalcore where bands like to fuck around, which is dead now. Bands do not fuck around now. Bands don't make jokes. The song titles are not funny. Everything is fucking serious all the time. This was actually like the dying breath of a whole scene, to be honest with you.
But you're not wrong. Like this is it's a really great time capsule. I think that it's like it's everything I've ever loved, but it's not perfect. Mm-hmm. So it's just okay. I think it's
just okay.
It's just okay. I think that's a good like.
It's a shame we didn't get a follow-up.
It's a real shame we didn't. But like you said, the follow-up could have been more boring and less enjoyable, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's like maybe this is like some weird blessing in disguise. So this band gets to like exist just as this one thing for all of eternity.
Great entity, yeah.
Right. Marcos, let's move on to our next album, Billy Talent 2 by Billy Talent.
This one's north of 2 decades old, I think.
Really? Is it that much?
That or it's like this year it'll be 2 decades, something like that.
Bro, I actually have to look.
I want to say this one falls between 04, 05, or 06, and I think it's 04. Sam's looking it up. We have a definitive year.
Are you ready for this?
Yeah.
2006.
Okay, not awful. Also 18 years old.
Yeah, okay, still old, sure, fine. Also, like, I don't want to sound crazy, but I think I last listened to this probably 18 years ago.
So that's actually one of my favorite aspects about this whole ranking the scene thing we're trying, which is for the longest time when we started the state of the scene, it was to stay up to date with all of our favorite artists.
Right.
And I think there's been an effect to that, which has been
right. We also transitioned away from listening to old albums.
Fully forget the past. So yeah, like man, actually that At the Skylines album I will occasionally revisit.
Okay.
Billy Talent 2, like you said, it's probably been a long time since I last listened to that one as well.
I'm like, I remember this being good. Like, at the very least, I remember this being the best Billy Talent album. Like, I had that in the back of my mind, right?
I thought going into it, and I'll show some of my cards here, that Billy Talent 1 was always like the Billy Talent album. And I think for some people it might be considered that. But I think walking out of this, like after hearing this record again with fresh ears, I can't imagine that there's any other Billy Talent album that is looked upon as fondly as I look upon this one now. It's like, this is that album for them.
Was this perplexingly good?
It was perplexing.
I was 4 or 5 songs deep, and I'm like, it's not letting up.
It was aggravatingly good in that I feel like I've been doing myself an injustice by not spending more time with it over the years.
Right. And you know what's crazy too is that like 2006 was the death of this genre of the scene.
100%.
Like, don't get me wrong, it still comes out in like fits and starts, but there was a unique window before like the new wave of the scene and like the Fall Out Boys, Paramore's, Panic at the Disco's completely taking over the airwaves, where bands like Billy Talent, Rise Against, and Green Day were like on top of the world with this shit. Yeah. Anti-Flag.
3 Days Grace, would that fall under
No,
there?
3 Days Grace. No. It's this specific style of punk rock that is more radio friendly, right?
Yeah.
Rise Against nailed it with the Siren Song and the Counterculture, right?
Yes.
Anti-Flag was kind of in there. Social Distortion was kind of like in there. Green Day, like, they've probably got a little more range, and they were able to flip into a completely different style very quickly, which I think Billy Talent also kind of tried to do. Yeah. But like this level of like piss and vinegar that was still fun to sing along to, like it stops right here. Like it peaks right here, and then we never see this like level of like just like quality ever again.
Well, I mean, I guess so, right? I remember Billy Talent 3 being really good.
It's not bad. It's pretty good, but like it's not this.
I don't know about other people, but I've certainly had like a Billy Talent phase, and I don't know if it like sort of lines up with what you're talking about, where it's just like, man, bands just used to sound like this.
Because you know what it is? It's back when you first discovered like the Used in My Chemical Romance, and you were like, what other bands are like this, right? And you would go to and you would get that Google image of like 300 bands on like and then like the Fray was up in a corner, and like Yumi at 6 was there, and like 3 Days Grace and Skillet, and then like bands like Billy Talent would be on there, so you'd be like, okay, I'm gonna check this shit out, right? Because you're just like, it's not like today where there's like 7,000 fucking bands. There were like 200 where you could just easily go check their shit out, right?
Well, I mean, you're talking like jumping on LimeWire.
Yeah, no, but like for real, right? You know what I mean? It's like now if I want a band that sounds almost like exactly like one band, there's like 42 examples.
Yes.
But back then, like I would say,
and it's
hey,
all at your fingertips.
I like Census Fail, and like I would only be like 3 clicks away from Billy Talent, even if they weren't really that similar.
Right, but I think you used to have to work for it a lot more. Like you did have to like turn every page of alternative press and read every review and be like, oh, recommended for fans of whatever, Green Day. I like Green Day. Like, let's...
Maybe what I mean to say is that the scene as like an all encapsulating thing was a lot broader, right? Like it had so much more that it encompassed in terms of what was like popular. Like I'm sure now there's like a billion more bands, so I guess technically the scene covers a lot more. But I think like when it came to like your most popular bands, like there was a bit more of like versatility there, a variety. I don't know how to explain it. It just used to be like back in the day, I would be like, give me a band like this. And even though these bands weren't incredibly similar, like these were just the options. You know what I mean?
Fair. So you're saying it doesn't let up after 5 songs. How are you feeling after the whole album?
I can't believe how deep the bench on this album goes.
It's fucking
right
deep.
I was thinking in the back of my mind, I was like, all right, well, we're gonna get Midnight Mass, right? And like Fallen Leaves. And like I know these songs. In the back of my mind, I know these songs are good. But suddenly I'm at like Worker Bees and I'm like, why is this hitting? What the fuck? And all right, here. You know that meme about one of Elon Musk's reply guys where Elon Musk is like, damn, haven't had sex in like 6 weeks. And this guy's like, he's like, top reply, Mr. Musk, sir, if my wife permits it, I would suck you off right here. And that's how I feel about the guitarist of Billy Talent. Like, holy shit, this dude does not quit. Like, one of the most talented fucking human beings I've ever seen in my whole life. Like, every single time one of these songs kicks off, it's just like the gnarliest fucking riff you've ever heard in your whole life. It's insane how consistent they are.
This album's got riffs. It's got a lot of riffs. Got a lot of big ass choruses.
It's willing to get a little fucking grimier and like a little heavier than like what would have been like acceptable for like a radio friendly song, for example. Mm-hmm. This is one of 5 good Canadian bands. Literally list them.
Spirit Box, Billy Talent.
Yeah.
It gets tough after that.
Silverstein, Counterparts.
Chunk, No Captain, Chunk.
Yeah. And Simple Plan gets left off the list. Yeah.
All right. Where do you think they rank though? That's where I have trouble here.
All right. I gotta be honest. I'm immediately, regardless of tier, it's in front of At the Skylines for me.
100%. Is it a tier above it? Is it 2 tiers?
I think 2 tiers is going so far. 3. I listen to this album and I go, man, Billy Talent are really that bitch. Like, I can't believe it, but they're really that bitch. It just makes too much sense to me.
I don't know, because I listened to this and, like, you were listing off songs and you could keep going, which is why I'm like, is this quietly a fucking classic?
It might be. It might be. Bare minimum,
to the point, Sam, again, where I'm listening to this, I'm like, man, why haven't I spun this album more over the years? Like, there's shit I'm missing out on here. To me, that screams certified classic. Yeah.
Look, before you make that choice, in the back of your mind, I want you to look at the rest of the albums that we have today. And make sure that you won't regret that decision. Because if that's how you feel, I like this album enough where I'm not going to push back on you.
I think I do.
All right.
I think I strangely fucking adore this album.
Billy Talent 2 is a certified hood classic. Moving on, Marcos. The Poison by Bullet for My Valentine, their debut album. Funny enough, I also feel like this came out in 2006, but I could be wrong.
2006 or 5, I think.
2005 in the UK, 2006 in the US.
Oh, okay. Separated by like a day. New Year's Day album.
All right. Going back to this one, I knew it was great. Like I didn't have like in my mind.
This album fucking raised you, Sam.
Yeah, precisely. You're 100% correct. Like this is probably what defined my taste for the next 20 years. You know what I mean? Like everything can go back to like what
It's
this
still defining
album
your
was
taste next
doing.
year.
In ways, I still feel like every metalcore band with every release wants to be putting out this album. Like somehow it's both heavy, but not so heavy that it didn't have the opportunity to go fucking triple platinum.
What else it got? What else?
It's got like this band's 3 defining songs.
It kind of do.
Which are peppered in among 7 other just incredibly good songs. Like
They come in kind of late too.
So the key singles off of this would be like Tears Don't Fall.
Sure.
All These Things I Hate revolve around me. And then what? Like our heavy song, right?
I guess you could go a couple different directions with it.
Which would be what?
Well, now I'm struggling. Now I'm on the spot and I'm struggling.
All right. Hold up.
What's that track listing?
That's what I need. That's what I need here. I guess
Her Voice Resides.
Yeah. So 4 Words to Choke Upon was like off of the EP that came before, right? I feel like those are. It's crazy to me that it really was the 2 ballads that really defined this album.
It's kind of nuts.
It's while everything else around it is just like straight metalcore.
It's kind of special though, right? It's very like Motionless in White nowadays.
Mm-hmm. But like I love so many of the songs on here. Like Spit You Out is fucking incredible.
Yes.
Her Voice Resides is fucking incredible. Like it's just one of these albums that like it doesn't have any blemishes. Like it's just flawless from start to finish. And not only is it flawless from start to finish, it's completely genre defining. Like this is up there with like I guess it would be like this, like I guess Suicide Season and Stand Up and Scream would come like right after. I feel like Avenged Sevenfold would come like
4 or 5 years after,
right before this. But like if we're talking about defining albums of metalcore, right? Like
right.
Like the albums that like are like the literal classic, and then like maybe Under Oath.
I think Under Oath is probably closest. And then after that, you probably start seeing like some Bring Me in there.
I feel like Avenged Sevenfold
depends.
for me is also very much like in line with what this album was trying to accomplish too. So it's hard to nitpick anything about this is where I say even the artwork's fucking iconic.
The artwork is the
Even
most
the fucking
iconic
artwork's
part about
iconic.
this.
It's fucking crazy.
For an album with some of the most iconic songs, the artwork is the most iconic thing here. That it's just so fucking sharp. I'm between 2 here. And I don't know if I'm way off the mark, but I'm between That Bitch and Hood Classic.
You feel that in a tier list of the entirety of the scene, Billy Talent 2 is stronger than The Poison by Bullet for My Valentine?
That's the whole point of this fucking Ranking the Scene show, Sam. Is that at some point you have to have those conversations, and I think that album's a little more consistent than The Poison is.
I think you're wrong. I think you're operating off of a level of expectations where you probably went into one with 0 and went into the other with a certain
Maybe
like it had to hit a certain level of expectation, and And the Poison probably met it, and Billy Talent 2 probably greatly exceeded it, but it's not fair because one was starting at a handicap.
Sure. So are you saying Billy Talent maybe is truly that bitch, and then Bullet's Hood Classic?
I think this is a matter of Bullet for My Valentine, I think, is a certified Hood Classic. I don't think I'd go further than that. The question is it in front of or behind Billy Talent 2?
It's probably in front of, like, even just the strongest singles on Bullet, I take over the strongest singles on Billy. The trouble is, I think what would be considered the deeper or weaker songs on Billy, I think I might take over the deeper or weaker songs off Poison. But I think you're right. I might be looking at it with like a different lens.
I think time would look down on us if we were to, in 5 years, go back to this and see that we had not respectfully put this album like here.
Okay. I'm fine with this.
I think part of the problem is that there's a level of known quantity with this working against it. But for me, it was like part of it was like I was bored with how good this record was.
That might have been it.
There was no surprises for me. It was exactly who I thought it was.
Yeah.
Just a banger from start to finish.
It was like the one album we put all of the considerations, everything that was up for consideration for this first episode in a wheel.
Mm-hmm.
We spun that and it spit out all these, and initially saw the Poison and I was like, okay, well, barely need to re-listen to that. Already know how good it is.
Precisely.
Just wasn't worried about it.
Like, I could have pretty much gone off memory with that one, which I couldn't do for most of these.
Okay.
All right, Marcus, moving on. Casey's Where I Go When I Am Sleeping, an album I hadn't heard before we listened to it for this.
The only album of this bunch that we hadn't heard before listening.
Yep, that's correct.
Before recording this show. Casey, a band that we are suddenly enamored with. They just dropped an album this year, 2023. It was like one of the first ones we listened to kick off January. This album dropped in 2016 or 2017, something like that.
Okay, all right. This is a fun guessing game that we've added as like part of this. 2018.
6 years ago. I don't know if I really had expectations going into this one. I guess I was mostly just curious. I really liked that Casey album we just heard.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, what did they used to sound like? Was it the same? Was it a little different?
But listening to that new Casey album at the very least like sets a standard for you. You know what I mean? Like, you're going back and you're being like, okay.
I did expect to like this.
Yeah,
and
precisely.
I ultimately do.
Yeah, agreed. I also do like this. Now, obviously, this album isn't part of the consideration, but because I listened to it so recently, I do much prefer the new album from Casey. I think it's much stronger than this.
Stylistically,
I've got that in the back of my mind.
Slightly different. This is definitely leaning a little more on the hardcore side of melodic hardcore.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas
especially when you get the spoken word bit in the very end of it. Yeah.
Whereas the new album is definitely a little bit on the more melodic side. I know they have a debut album. We also have not heard that one. But I think ultimately I walk away from this one having enjoyed it. I think that the intro song is fucking powerful. There are moments on this record. I think powerful is the best way to describe those moments throughout this record where, like, there are certain points where you just get the wind knocked out of you because the strength of what their singer is saying just hits you.
Fucking like S-tier level writing, like just so fucking impressive.
Well, and the subject matter itself
paints such a fucking grim picture so fucking well.
Talking about, like, you know, being in hospital rooms, you know, making decisions that would hurt loved ones. There's a line in there where it's like, I used to think that, or no, I'm thinking of the new album. There's another similar line on here where it's like, I I know I should have deleted your number, but I just wanted to call to let you know I don't miss you, something like that. And I'm slightly.
But there's
paraphrasing.
levels of lines that carry such immense weight, similar to that over and over and over again. This album is a fucking anchor, just dragging you all the way down to the bottom of the fucking ocean. Like, it's so truly depressing, but in a way that I honestly appreciate, because it does such a good job of like thoroughly painting a picture of like down to like, you know, now I'm in my head because I'm not talking, and now I know my mom's like now she's worrying about me because she knows when I'm in my head and I'm not talking, like that kind of shit, like that. Oh, I've been laying in my bed for all week, and it's like like never ending fucking despair.
This is the type of album that would have it would have connected with me on an ethereal level had I listened to it in a different time or place.
Sadly,
yeah, like. It's like when people joke about like, you know, the new Weekend album is about to drop. Like, I better go ruin my life so I can enjoy it to its fullest potential.
That's 100% correct.
It's like I want to listen to this Casey album under those conditions,
right?
So I can fully appreciate
like some sort of like meta level of listening, where it's like you've never related more, like you're in the same place as this individual. Yeah. Now, all that being said, I think that like, I really enjoy so many aspects of it, but didn't necessarily feel like I loved too many of the songs off of it.
Yeah, I still don't know if I'm fully in love with like Casey's song structures.
I like it much better on the new album than I like it here. Here I like I think the overall product is strong in terms of like what it's communicating. And its themes, but the standout tracks for me are like the opener and the closer in a really strange way, just because like they do such a good job of like kicking things off and then like very, very like strongly closing them in the end. But everything in between kind of just feels like one long ongoing narrative to me.
Okay.
Which I don't know is necessarily the worst thing for an album. I just, it's a very different listening experience than everything else we checked out this week.
It's definitely different. I don't know if it's like that iconic though is the trouble I have with this one. So I think appropriate rank for it, the appropriate tier is probably Just Okay.
I agree. And I don't think I'd put it ahead of At the Skylines.
At the Skylines got some insane peaks that just like as the weeks go on, I can see At the Skylines staying at the top of Just Okay. Because it's
it's like the pinnacle of Just Okay.
It's a few missteps away from being that bitch.
And this is like overall listening experience, strong. Already in my mind, I know there are better Casey albums.
I think like as we go on, I think Just Okay is where we're gonna find ourselves putting a lot of albums.
Agreed.
But we'll see. Next up is Amorosa by Amorosa.
So I'm not gonna lie. What I remember about this album is its vocalist, Johnny Craig, who is someone I have not engaged with since they were kicked out of Slaves, probably 8 years ago. Oh God, was it just? Why do I feel like it was an eternity?
It was. It might have been 2018. No, but I think 2018 is when the last Johnny Craig Slaves album dropped.
Mm-hmm.
And then they do like the deluxe-ish revision stuff in 2019, which doesn't come out before they get to kick Johnny Craig out like a week before.
Right.
Yeah. It's like January.
So Johnny Craig is an artist who I haven't engaged with since for obvious reasons, because they're unfortunately their addiction has made it hard to empathize with them based off of the actions they've taken over the course of their life and especially more recently. And it's you know, there are time and place where I felt like this was an individual that could be helped and could be redeemed and was just an unfortunate victim of their addiction. And now I still feel like this is a person who could be helped and should be helped, but I don't think that there's any aspect of them that needs to be or should return to the limelight. Even though I guess it's my understanding Johnny Craig as a solo artist still operates, like still tours and still puts out material. I just like have completely disconnected from them as an artist.
Yeah. That said, I that won't stop me from occasionally going back and enjoying, you know, Downtown Battle Mountain 1, really any of those Slaves albums.
It exists almost like frozen in time in that way. Like, oh, this was this album during this period of my life that I could enjoy, and it just now tastes very different when trying to engage with that artist.
So all that said, what else do you remember about this album? Like, how did you feel about it when it came out?
I remember it being disappointing.
This one's a 2010, 2011 album.
I remember it starting strong and then just falling off slowly over the course of like each song that followed like the opening 3 tracks.
Which are some big ones. You have like A Toast to the Future Kids.
That was the one, like that might have been like my favorite song the year that came out. Like
it might have been like my favorite Omarosa song for a long time.
Yeah, that's a fair point as well.
So you felt that way about it initially. You obviously re-listened to it now, ahead of recording this episode. Do those feelings change? Do they stay the same?
I was caught off guard by how strong overall this record is. It almost played completely differently than I remembered it. It's just like, I don't know if it's disengaging from an artist like Johnny Craig and then almost like forgetting they exist, only to go back and remember why I liked them so much at the time.
Yeah.
And it really kind of like that wave of nostalgia, like knocked me on my ass. It was almost like difficult to reckon with, because it's like having all of that flood back while at the same time knowing the current state of affairs. It was such a fucking bizarre thing to like take in. I was almost saddened by how good this album was.
Well, it's also the last quote unquote post-hardcore Omarosa album too. A lot of factors here.
Yeah, so
consider.
This was the last Omarosa record with Johnny Craig, right? Who then would later go on to be in Slaves, who would then kick him out for his behavior. And then like, it's been 4 years since I listened to like those Slaves albums. So like there's so much has elapsed in time since I've like, and I don't want to focus the entire basis of this conversation around Johnny Craig, but for me, it was the driving factor that made me interested in Omarosa. And I still think leaving this record, it is the driving factor of what made Omarosa so good in this individual instance.
I mean, even respectful to like those first couple of DGD albums, like once you get a taste of Johnny Craig's vocals, like suddenly that is the only vocal style you want to hear, and you really can only go to Johnny Craig for it. I remember comparing Color Morale, their vocalist, a whole bunch to Johnny Craig back in the day.
Mm-hmm.
And I went back and recently re-listened to No Hope, just because Color Morale came back and they played a show recently. And man, doesn't even compare. Those vocals barely compare.
Johnny Craig is obviously a vocalist that has been unfortunately had to be replaced multiple times. And by the grace of God, many of these bands have managed to find someone who is able to, at the very least, present a style or go almost toe to toe with Johnny Craig. But there's something about the original that like just still to this day stands strong. So it's like, I don't want to stand here and over compliment an individual who has gone on to be fairly heinous with like many of their life choices. But like, this is one of those situations where it's like, it's such a shame for multiple reasons. And then one small aspect of that is because unfortunately they had such a God-given talent that it has completely been wasted.
So with all that in mind, what are you feeling?
So I feel like we've discussed a lot the Johnny Craig of it all, but I think the overall album is still a case of starts very strong, does not fall off as harshly as I remembered it, but still is goes from great to just good. So like, I don't think that overall this is like an excellent album. I think it's a strong one, but not an incredible one.
Okay.
I think he would go on to Johnny Craig individual, make better albums with Slaves than he did with Emarosa.
Emarosa would go on to make better albums than they did with Johnny Craig. Where do you fall then? What do you mean though? You said pretty good a couple of times.
It's wavering on that bitch, but might fall closer to just okay. I think a lot of it is me trying to level myself with the experience of reliving the nostalgia of an artist that I haven't listened to in years versus the actual quality of the album.
I think it's probably closer to just okay for me.
So then after our big spiel about how we felt about At the Skylines, would you put this in front of that? Would you put this in front of Casey? Would you put this behind both of those?
I think I put it behind both. I think there is a drop off for sure on this album.
Yeah.
Again, no arguing that it's got some fucking amazing highs.
You're
and they
sure?
might be higher than Casey.
You're sure, given the choice, yeah, that you wouldn't, I think, at least put it here?
It looks right as you hover, but I guess. I
think I feel stronger about that, where I don't think this Casey album has the gravity that this Emarosa record did. For me,
it's
at
a
the very
little
least.
tough. It's a little tough because I'm coming off of this having only heard this Casey album twice, whereas I've heard that Emarosa album at least like a dozen times. But all right, I think that looks okay.
Moving on, Marcos.
Final three.
Right. The Spark by Enter Shikari. I could be wrong, but this might have been just hovering at like my album of the year it dropped.
So this one's funny. I got a weird case of just absolutely forgetting about this album. Let me rewind a little bit. I guess what I meant is like, I remember not enjoying this album as much as I like over the years. I look back on this album and I'm like, oh yeah, that album. But the year it came out, I was definitely high on it. So I don't know where in my mind this record, The Spark, suddenly started to exist in a weird headspace for me. And the reason I mention all this is because I remember when we were doing AOTY end of the year stuff in 2020, I ranked that record that had come out, and I'm blanking on the name for whatever reason.
The one before this?
Yeah.
Minesweep?
No, the one after this.
Oof. Is this the most recent one that came out?
No, it's the one with the fucking Roman Empire head bust.
It's like
everything is true, but
right. Everything is true and nothing is possible. Or something. Everything is possible and nothing is true. Yeah, something along those lines. Yeah.
I remember ranking that number 2 because in my mind I was like, man, if Enter Shikari don't rank here, I don't know if they'll ever come as close ever again.
Fair.
Forgetting that, like, I really enjoyed The Spark. So for me, that last record, or that anything is true but nothing is possible, whatever that album is called. For me, that was a comeback album, but in reality, I go back and listen to The Spark and I'm like, man, no, it wasn't. Like, this band was still on top of their game. And I remember catching them live when this album had dropped shortly thereafter. It was a tough decision too, because I remember it was a 10-year tour going on for Bless the Fall and Escape the Fate on the same day in like a neighboring city or something, neighboring state. And we had to make the decision between Enter Shikari's headliner or that Escape the Fate, Bless the Fall headliner. We ultimately went with Enter Shikari, and I remember that being like one of my favorite shows I've ever been to. And a lot of it's off of the strength of the material on The Spark. Like, that album live fucking smacks.
This continues to be one of the most emotional listening experiences I have with any album. It is an incredible gut punch to me every time I listen to it. I don't know if it's some weird combination of things where it's just like how emotional this record is coupled with wherever I was in my time of life when I listened to it. But it's hard for me to even go back and listen to this album without it having such like a intense impact on me. It's
really,
for me, I think having gone back and listened to this, outside of Take to the Skies, which was my introduction to them, this for me is probably the pinnacle of Enter Shikari. I just think that it's how I think of this band in a million different ways now. I think of them as being like much more emotional, much more thought-provoking. You know, in ways they're significantly more tame than they used to be. But I think they make it work really well for them on this record. Like something like The Sights, for all intents and purposes, feels like it would be the turning point where I would argue against a band and say that they've lost their vision.
Sure.
They've lost their spirit. But for Enter Shikari, it was like the transition was so natural, I couldn't even question it. It's conceptual. It's beautiful. Like, I really think this is one of the best albums to ever come out of the scene. Like, I think it will go uncredited as one of the greatest pieces of work to ever come out of the scene.
We have a chance to credit it on this definitive ranking the scene.
I'm bold, though. I'm bold. This is masterpiece level for me.
Can I tell you something crazy?
Go ahead.
I think that this record, out of all of them here that we're looking at, has the best song out of every single one of these records.
All right, we're going to try to do it on 3 and see if we say the same song.
Okay.
1, 2, 3. Airfield. Yeah. I think Airfield is like, if I had to make a top 100 songs of the scene, that's in it, like, easily, like immediately on the ballot.
I remember seeing that live and like I was close to tears.
Precisely. Like, it's all, the delivery is just something else. Like, it's fucking otherworldly.
But this record has so many different layers too, because you have that
coupled against like Rabble Rouser.
Well, I was gonna say in The Revolt of the Atoms, which is just this very campy Enter Shikari song, and ends up being one of my favorite tracks on the record as well. But that's what I mean. It's like one of the most emotional songs you've heard in your life. Silly campy song.
We were talking earlier about how At the Skylines were in such this sweet spot of being a bunch of 19-year-olds who were just having fun and had no stakes and could be creative. Enter Shikari has operated like that their entire career, which is like, unlike the vast majority of bands that I listen to within this scene, so many bands get deep into their career and they're trying to like recreate the sound that made them popular. They're trying to do what other bands around them are doing that's working well, but Enter Shikari is always just doing them,
constantly reinventing themselves. Yeah.
They age so gracefully.
So I think heading into this, again, for whatever reason I had it in my mind, I didn't like this album. So expectations heading into re-listening were low.
Mm-hmm.
And I was expecting to come out of it being like, oh, this is probably pretty mid. You're not wrong, though. I look at this record. I look at all the competition on here. It's closer to masterpiece than it isn't. And I think that does feel super right. It's just to fucking
It's a work of art.
It's a strangely strong record.
Absolute work of art. Margos. You Can't Spell Slaughter Without Laughter by I Set My Friends on Fire. Probably one of the weirdest fucking bands albums we'll ever have in this scene. Like right from the fucking jump.
Everything you said, right? Like it's not just a weird album. The band is weird. They've had a weird history. They released an album as their sophomore that they go ahead and like they had to scrap. 5 years later, they go on to release what they intended it to be. It's better than that, I think. What originally had come out.
Mm-hmm.
One of those examples of a band that gets real popular off of a cover.
A cover that's featured on the album, which is a rarity.
Nowadays, yeah, sure.
Actually, maybe slightly more common nowadays, but especially back then, a rarity.
I guess that's more what I meant. Yeah, like back then, like unheard of. It's like doubling up on your Punk Goes.
Is it better than the original? Is Crank That by I Set My Friends on Fire better than the original?
Listen, there's a reason my Twitter handle is Soulja Boy, right? Okay, and I think it's partly
You're the person
to do
to ask.
with this. It's partly to do with this. Like, Crank That by Soulja Boy. Okay. This cover, insane, visionary, all that. And I think the rest of the album's got a lot of moments that are visionary as well. This album really defined a time and place for me. Going back and re-listening to it again, because I think then we did the God, it had a similar name to this show.
Well, it was like classic scene reviews or something.
Yeah, some shit like that. Diving back into this album was like, man, this is actually better than I remember it being. And again, doing it a couple of years removed from that, it's still better than I remember it being. How are you feeling though? I can't really.
I think this album's kind of bad.
No,
I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Because while I think that like in the for the virtue of like wanting to appreciate bands who are just like abstract and want to try things and are especially weird, I appreciate I Set My Friends on Fire significantly more than I enjoy I Set My Friends on Fire.
This album does have like a weird skit or something I remember hating.
It's the opening, right? With the aliens and being taken to their planet, right?
Yeah. Shit, it talks, I'm out of here. But then you also have like Ravenous Rhinos, dog. Hardcore two-step.
They're not.
The Nuns are
They're
watching.
Not bad. But like, if we start looking at other albums that came out around the same time, this one's falling to the bottom of the pile quickly.
This one's like high school nostalgia pulling a lot from me, but I remember loving this album then. I love it now.
Is it Nothing Rhymes with Orange?
Yes.
Absolute fucking classic banger. That and Crank That, I think
Things That Rhyme with
Orange are the absolute standouts on this album for me.
I don't know. I think that But the Nuns Are Watching is like arguably my favorite song from this band.
I would not be willing to pull this over Pretty Mid. Is that too harsh? I think that are you leveling with me? Like, do you want to go lower? No, I don't think I'd go lower because I don't think this album. I don't think this album is fucking awful. I just don't think it's a great album in any way. It's like got a couple of good songs. It's got a handful of good ideas, but like it's not an album I love to listen to. I'm gonna be honest with you. It's fun, but it's not very good.
I think I can see the very end of Just Okay, or if you feel more secure about Pretty Mid, I'll allow that.
It's just like
it's not all good, but like
I'm trying to level with if Pretty Mid is too disparaging a term, and if this album being described as just okay would obviously be a more apt place to put it. I just think that this is an album that for me will float constantly to the bottom of just okay if that's where it ends up.
Okay.
or it's the best pretty mid album of all time. Like it's one or the other. You know what I mean?
Okay.
I'm gonna let high school Marcos make the judgment call on this. What would 15-year-old you do?
You don't want this. It's GOAT.
Go.
Let's go top of pretty mid, I guess.
Okay.
At some point, we have to start making some heartbreaking decisions.
The reality is that like if these albums are just okay, this is probably pretty mid by comparison.
Yeah, no, I think you're right, and I don't think like once you start looking at like that Bullet album, is this record from I Set My Friends on Fire 2 tiers beneath it, or is it more 3 tiers beneath it? Like
I would not be willing to say this album is fucking awful because I don't think that's an accurate way of describing it.
I'm not saying that.
Okay.
I'm saying like I think Pretty Mid's actually probably fine.
Okay, got it.
While understanding that it's got some fucking insane bangers on there.
It's got some insane bangers on it. All right, there's a reason that it still resonates and that artwork still feels iconic in some capacity.
It truly is. A lot of iconic artwork here.
Well, I mean, that's what you're going to get when you ask people to give you like their favorite albums ever from the scene.
Yeah, true.
Marcus, we got one last album, and that would be After Laughter by Paramore. Came out in 2017.
Fresh off divorce.
Fresh off that divorce.
Fresh off of shedding MC PP Poo Poo, whatever the guy's fucking name was.
You're talking about, why do I want to say Jeb? It's not
Germ.
Germ, yes.
Germ. That fucking whack ass bassist or guitarist that this band had. They bring a fucking Pharaoh brother back into the fold.
Here's how I remember this album. This is Paramore's follow-up to their biggest success of all time.
And worst album by a fucking long shot for me.
But like...
Not After Laughter. Follow-up to their worst album.
Right. I think if you were to ask anybody, like, if you were to ask most people what Paramore song they know, it's probably Ain't It Fun, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, I think us scene kids might default to Misery Business.
I know what you mean.
But most people would say Ain't It Fun.
I default to Decode because I'm built different.
Sure.
But no, Ain't It
still
Fun,
into you, and it is probably directly beneath it.
Still into you. But I think after you start, if you keep playing that game, I think you start to get some songs from After Laughter.
You know, that's interesting.
I
don't know if I think that's true.
I don't think you worked in retail enough.
Okay, fair.
Around this time then.
So then what were you hearing? Rose Colored Boy?
No, the main single off this one. I'm blanking on the...
Fake Smile?
No.
Fake Happiness?
Fake
What the fuck is like a Fake Happy?
Fake Happy didn't take off in that way. I'm talking like Hard Times.
Okay, sure. Yes, you're right. Hard Times, I think, would be what?
Hard Times has to be like
the biggest song off of this
most.
album.
Yeah, for sure. I'm a little surprised though, re-listening to this, how many tracks I do truly enjoy off of this one. One of the main ones that took me by surprise was like Told You So. That song fucking slaps in a way that I did not remember it slapping. That said, it's not all good. There's some tracks that I remember enjoying, like 26, that weren't quite doing it for me. Pool, that I didn't remember enjoying, and I still don't really enjoy. But between songs, like the ones previously mentioned, I did like. The rest of the album, You're Fake Happy. I think there's still tons of pretty good material on here. It sounds like this one's not doing it for you still.
I had such a weird experience with this album because, like, when all is said and done, I think this is really enjoyable. Like, I really like listening to this album. I think that it's definitely better than their self-titled album by a mile.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a more enjoyable listen than their most recent album. Like, I just think it's more fun. Like, it's more laid back. Like, for all intents and purposes, everything on this album probably has like some level of single potential.
I enjoy that it is a little less experimental than the latest record is. It's just this like really cool. It's like that album that just it fleshes out the connections between, like, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know.
I get like it's like a transitional album in some weird way. Well, actually, no, I kind of disagree with you. What I feel like is this is like the peak of where Paramore could go if they wanted to continue being a broader, more radio-friendly pop band. Not that they were ever not radio-friendly, but what I mean is, like, if they wanted to continue to be grocery store heroes, this is that album, right? Like, everything about it is just... I'm going to be honest. I just think, like, it's kind of a bland album. Like, it's really boring outside of like one or two tracks. So much of the instrumentals just feel like the same thing, except like randomly generated in a different order for each song. Like, it just feels to me that everything has the same sort of like background instrumental to Haley's like really poppy vocal delivery. And it makes so many of the songs kind of like just feel exactly the same to me. Like, there's no variety on this record, and there's no interesting swings the way we have on the most recent album. So like in ways this is like almost too safe for me, and like it's not how I remember it at all. I remember this album being a little weird, like, oh, all right, Paramore's kind of like shaking it up a little bit. But going back and listening to it, I'm like, no, that's not this album at all. This album to me just sounds like Paramore taking the producer notes on just about everything and putting out something that just feels like such a safe bet. Like, it's a surprise to me we didn't have more hit singles off of this album, because it just feels like it was tailor-made to just follow up the album that came before it and keep Paramore on that train of success.
Okay.
And I wonder if the fact that they didn't necessarily see as much success with this album as they did with the one before it made them kind of just like fully hit the reset button. And that's why we are able to be listening to something that sounds completely different with their newest album.
I feel like this album did really well.
I'm sure it did well by virtuous comparison to most albums that we listen to, but and for the fact that it was following up another really popular Paramore album, but I don't think there's a lot of staying power here. Like, I just don't think it's a really strong... Like, I think when everyone looks back at what their favorite Paramore albums are, like, After Laughter feels like the most boring answer you could possibly give. You know what I mean? Like, everything else is kind of interesting, and this is just this album.
So I'll factor all that in. I think that this album is still really enjoyable. It's got some of my favorite Paramore songs in general.
I say all this without saying that it's bad. It's just like...
So what I'll tell you is I can't see this being in any of those last three tiers.
No, I think it's higher than that, but I don't think I'd go very high.
It's probably just okay then, is where we ultimately land. I think I take this over Casey and Amorosa.
I think the peaks on that Amorosa album leave this in the dust.
I don't think that's
maybe there's more
respectful.
Consistency with this record, but I think that the heights of that Amorosa album cast a shadow over After Laughter.
I don't know if I agree.
Why though? Like, what are the two songs on here that are really...
I think I just value the consistency over it. I think Told You So and Fake Happy are really the shining beacons on this album. I think those are good beacons.
I think Fake Happy is probably far and away my favorite song off of there, because it just feels like the most authentic version of that bit. Like, I feel like I'm actually like, over the course of a record that seems kind of like mostly quirky and fun, that feels a bit too real.
So like 26 is not quirky and fun by any means.
Mostly, I said, not everyone.
I can throw a couple of like there are 3 songs on there at least that are not quirky and fun. By
I feel
any
like
means.
The energy of this album is so fucking goofy. Like Rose Colored Boy and Told
I kind
You
of
So.
love it.
It's enjoyable to listen to. Yes, I just don't think it's like that makes necessarily for like the a great album.
Okay.
I think it's a fun listen, but like I don't think that I would like give it more accolades than that.
So you're saying ahead of Casey?
Okay, yeah. If this category were only like based off of did I have fun listening to it, sure. But I mean, either way, I think yes ahead of Casey. I guess where I struggle a little bit is if I like how this looks or not.
You've had a little bit of time to think about it. What do you think? I'll go with whatever you want here.
I think that I'm willing to say that overall, this is a slightly better album. Maybe I'm doing what I criticized you doing with these two records here, where I maybe went in with a certain level of expectations and was slightly disappointed, and then had the vice versa experience with Amorosa. So I'm comfortable settling on this.
Okay.
It's not, nothing about it feels egregious enough that I would heavily push back on it.
We both are in agreement that At the Skyline's still king of the Just Okay records, though.
It's the most Just Okay album of all time, as where we currently sit.
All right, I'm looking at this list and I'm okay with it. I'm happy with it.
Yeah, I will say that overall, it was a really fun experience to go back and listen to these 8 albums, and I'm kind of hoping to get that same thing each week as we revisit some of these older ones that I haven't touched in just like years, if not over a decade in some instances.
Yeah. If you'd like if you'd like to recommend an album every week to get added to this list, sign up to our Patreon, and we'll post something every week, and you can throw a suggestion in. Is that what you do?
You can submit them for consideration. I think ideally what I'd like to do is have myself bring an album, you bring an album, and to choose one from the Patreon. So join us each week as we add albums to this ongoing list as we try to rank the scene. Thanks, everybody.
Good fucking play.